Hi everyone, this is SWRPG Guides, and I'm here bringing you a guide on minion groups today. I thought this was a good subject to go over because I think it's something that maybe a lot of people either don't know about or could be a little confusing. So we'll go over kind of how minion groups work today, as they do have their own separate set of rules compared to other enemy types. So just as kind of some background before we go into it, there are three different types of enemies in SWRPG, and so those are minions, which are basically the lowest level of enemies. These are, stormtroopers, Gamorrean guards, Tusken raiders, things that are usually better in bigger groups. If you were to fight just one of them on their own, they would be very easy to kill. So minions function as a group in most situations. The second level is rival. These are close to, I guess, playable character type. The only difference is they almost always, or I think they always don't have strain thresholds, but they can have like talents and abilities, things like that, and they're usually more skilled in other things as well. And then you also have the Nemesis, which is kind of the top level, bosses, if you will, the hardest enemies in the game. And these are basically the same as playable characters. They have strain threshold, they can have talents and gear, and lots of different things that they are able to do. But for minion groups, as I said, they usually will work within a group. As kind of a rule of thumb, it's probably best to not have a group of minions over 6. And we'll go into why that's true with the roles. So if you, let's say you are doing a large battle, or you want to have a large group of minions, maybe stormtroopers come up, my recommendation would be to not have one minion group of like 20, but instead to have maybe 4 groups of 5 in order to hit the 20. And so that's kind of the first thing that I would say. And generally, you're not going to need that many minions unless because that'll make combat go by a little too slowly. So this really is a convenience system. It makes it a lot easier for not only GMs to keep track of their slots within the initiative, but also it saves a lot of time instead of having to kill a bunch of individual characters, enemies in a game. You can just kind of attack one. There are some drawbacks to this though, so we're going to start within this list on the right here. So minion groups do act as one character, so in pretty much all aspects besides narrative, they will act together as one. So they share all the same stats, so the same characteristics. The only difference is that their total wound threshold will be affected by the number of individuals there are in the group. But it's also good to note that they're all identical, so they will all be the same species, they'll all have the same gear and the same weapons. As far as their the way they look and their appearance, that can change if you want to do it narratively. But I think it's good to note that there's a difference between what you can do with a minion group narratively and what you can do within combat. And also movement and stuff. They can't really split up as a minion group in combat. So with that being said, that means they also take damage as one, but you can do it a different way. And this is kind of, bending the rules a little bit. You can decide as a GM, if you want to have them all take damage separately, because it won't have a huge effect. And the reason I say that is because having them take damage as one is not ideal in my opinion. This is one of the drawbacks to it. So generally you want to have them take damage as one. They have a large total wound threshold, and each time you hit a multiple of that wound threshold, you basically remove one of the minions from the group. But again, narratively, when you are in combat, if you want to narrate a situation with a minion group, you can say that they attack several playable characters, but they can only hit one at a time. So for instance, as an example, if you have a group of Tusken raiders, maybe they kind of ambush your group within like a canyon or something like that, and they all kind of aim and fire, and maybe they all are attacking different people, and one of the Tusken raiders hits one of the playable characters. Or same with, let's say, like a melee attack. Maybe you have some Gamorrean guards, as I mentioned. They are going into a group, and they're all, you can kind of narrate how they're all swinging, and maybe even go through their individual actions. But one of them kind of connects, so that's how you will have to narrate it. So it is a little limited. But yeah, you have to, and you also have to declare who you are attacking. You can't just, say, oh, they attack all of the PCs and then decide who they hit. You have to kind of say beforehand who they're going to be attacking individually. So generally, it's easier to just say that the entire group is firing or attacking one character, but you can change it narratively if you want to. Also, out of combat, they can also do narratively things different. Let's say you have a stormtrooper patrol, they are investigating an area. You can have them say, one is searching this area while the other one is, somewhere else. So that works. So each minion does have its own wound threshold, but as I said, the main way to do this is just to subtract characters in the minion group each time a certain number is reached. So we'll go into this example with the Tusken Raider example I have on the left in another page. I will say this sheet is not completely accurate. First of all, since it's a minion group, I'm pretty sure it shouldn't be having talents or abilities. It can have the gear, but and also the skills are not right. So the reason I say that is this website is usually pretty reliable, and I am on the wrong one here. But this has a completely different list of skills, and I think this makes way more sense because it has melee and range heavy available, which would make sense. It also has perception listed, whereas this does not have that. It has brawl, resilience, and survival. So I'm not sure why it's different. Maybe it was a different system that I got this picture from, but I'm still going to use it just as an example. And we're going to just change things around a little bit. But with that being said, again, so for the Tusken Raiders, we'll just say that their base wound will be 3. So if you have just one Tusken Raider, it'll be 3. If you have 2, it'll be 6. 3 will be 9. That's kind of how it would work if you were creating this group. So you add them all together for the total wounds, and then again, once you hit a certain wound, a multiple of the wound threshold, you remove one of them, and that will affect the dice pool as well. So we'll go into that example, as I said, after we talk about the rolls and stuff like that. But yeah, just as a rule of thumb, you can add the wounds together if you want, or you can just say maybe one player is attacking the entire group and you delegate one minion in that group to be the one that they attack, and then just kind of individually have their wounds. So let's go into kind of how the roles will work. This is where really the strength of minion groups are available within combat. So the number of minions that you have in a group will affect their roles. So for each minion that you have in a group, it will upgrade your dice pool if they have that skill. So again, if we're going by this sheet, you would only be able to upgrade brawl, resilience, survival. But obviously, in reality, you would also be upgrading melee, perception, range, heavy as well. That would be the actual abilities. So if they don't have a skill in something, then you won't upgrade for it. They can roll for it, but generally the rule is for enemies, if they don't have a skill in something, you just roll whatever the characteristic is, and it's in green dice. So for instance, if this Tusken Raider was rolling for like charm, they have a presence of 1, so they would just roll 1 green, and it doesn't matter how many there are, they would always roll 1 green. But again, for the other ones, you would upgrade to yellows, depending on how many they have in that skill. So this works because you add 1 yellow after the first. So if you have just 1 Tusken Raider, their skill in brawl is just going to be 2 greens. But if you then have 2 Tusken Raiders, you upgrade one of those greens to a yellow. So their pool would be yellow-green. Once you hit the total ranks in a skill, it will, and if you have more minions after that, it will only add greens. And that's just the nature of the dice pool in this system. So the way it works is you always take the larger number between the characteristic and the skill. That's the total dice pool. And then you take the other number, and that is the number that are yellow. So kind of going off that to explain it more. So let's say you have a group of 3 Tusken Raiders, and you're rolling for brawl, which has 2 greens. The larger number of that between the the number of the Tusken Raiders would be 3, so that would be the total dice pool. And then the number of Brawl is what you would actually upgrade. So you can only have 2 yellows within that pool. Hopefully that makes sense, me explaining it, but if you just think about the rules of the dice pool, if you already know how that works, it's the same here. So we'll go into the example, as I said, after this to kind of maybe visualize it a little bit better, but yeah, you cannot go over the total ranks. You just would add extra greens after that. So let's kind of go further with this. Let's say there is a group of 5 Tusken Raiders, and they are rolling for Brawl. That means they would have 2 yellow and then 3 greens for a total of 5. So so that's kind of how that would work. Now, I think that's pretty much everything that I wanted to go over. I guess another good thing to mention, and I might have already said this, the soak stays the same, so you don't increase the soak depending on how many there are. And then if there is a defense number, that will stay the same too. You don't upgrade that at all. So let's go into an example with the same sheet that I have here. So we have a group of Tusken Raiders. Let's say that there are 3 of them in this minion group. Their wound threshold would be 9 because you add the individual wound threshold for each of them. So 3 times 3 is 9. Their soak again will stay at 3. Their defense will be 1. And then if they were to roll for Brawl, once again, you add a yellow for every minion there is past the first. So they have 2 greens. That means they would add 2 yellows to that. And so they would just roll that for Brawl. For Resilience, the same thing. They have 2, so it'd be 2 yellows. If they were to roll for Survival, it would be yellow, yellow, green. And then I also added Melee, Range Heavy. It'd also be yellow, yellow. And then yellow, yellow for Range Heavy as well. So that's kind of how those would be broken up. And I did mention it doesn't make sense to have minion groups over 6, and that's because the total ranks you can have in any skill is 5. So if you have more than 6, you're not gaining anything from that. You can't go more than 5. So again, if you have 6 Tusken Raiders, let's say they have 5 ranks in something. If you had 6 Tusken Raiders, that would mean 5 yellows. After that, it doesn't improve. You can't add another green after that. That's just how it is. You can only go at 5. So that's why it makes sense to split up groups if you want there to be more than 6, because otherwise you're just losing minions. You know, the thing that would change is the wound threshold would go up still. That has no limit, but you would not gain any dice from it. So it is in your best interest to have multiple minion groups if it goes over 6. So just as kind of an example of combat, let's say one of the PC characters fires at the minion group, they fire at the entire group, and let's say it hits for 7. So again, this has a wound threshold of 9. That means with the soak of 3, that 4 damage will pass through, and because each individual minion has a threshold of 3, that means the 4 covers that, so one of the minions will die. It'll kill 1 minion, and now the group is left at 2, and you are almost at the wound threshold. So you do have to go over the the wound threshold in order to get the entire group. So because the group is now at 2, that will reduce the dice pool. So now you can only add 1 dice to all of your rolls. So Brawl would be yellow, green. Same with Resilience. Survival would be yellow, green, green. Melee, yellow, green. Range Heavy, yellow, green. So you do subtract the dice depending on how many are left. There is a rule that I saw, and it says that if you have enough damage to cover the wound threshold of 2 minions, that it does not kill 2. You can only fire 1 at a time. I wouldn't play that way. I think that's actually one of the main things that I would change. I think that if you have enough damage to cover 2, you should be able to shoot 2. Obviously, within kind of the rules of combat, you're only supposed to fire 1 target at a time unless you have auto fire. But I think it makes sense, and again, it'll move combat a little bit quicker to say if you have enough damage, you can kill 2 of the minions. But I'm pretty sure the rules say you can't. Another thing that I don't think I mentioned is in the rules it says that if you crit, you can decide to remove another minion with the crit. I think that complicates combat even more, because you're essentially now increasing the wound threshold of the minion group, because you are removing one. So you have to adjust the wound threshold. It complicates things. So if you want to do that, you can. I personally would not use that rule. I would just use normal crit rules for that. And then, so kind of as the last part of this example, let's say now the minion group attacks for melee. Their pool is, again, reduced to yellow-green. They would attack as 1, and they would deal damage to 1 PC. But again, narratively, you can say that they are all swinging with whatever melee weapon they have. And you can kind of go through what that might look like. So that's a quick overview of the minion groups in this system. Hopefully that has helped you all. If you do have questions about it, feel free to let me know in the comments. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.